Hello, you're listening to Born Optimistic. I'm here in the potentially noisy confines of the RT canteen with musician turned environmental activist and educator, Gavin Harte. Gavin, how's it going?
Very well done, thank you.
Gavin, the first question I have to ask you, where do you sit on the optimism spectrum?
Yes. I kind of knew that question was coming. And in truth, I don't know that I sit on it at all, actually. I think if I was to put myself in a character trait, I would be a realist. I'm a glass half full of water and air kind of person. So...
And have you always been so, or is this something you learnt the hard way?
I think I have learned that I am a realist, but I have always been one. It's like I used to say I'm an environmentalist. You know, it's a bit like being gay in a way. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of born that way. And, you know, that's the game. Yes, I do believe I am a realist. And optimism is interesting, and I like the way that people, you know, are optimistic. But I also like pessimism. I like idealism as well, you know. So all of those traits are valuable commodities within the spectrum, as you say.
And how does being a realist manifest itself in your daily life?
I suppose I'm quite independent. I look for evidence. I'm slow to take, you know, fancy. If somebody wants to convince me, they really do need to convince me. As I say, we're all entitled to our opinions, but you're not entitled to your facts. Do you know? And that's kind of the way I would like to look at it. Show me. Give me the evidence.
And you said there you were born an environmentalist. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I grew up in a family where I think, well, geographically, I grew up in a beautiful place down in West Cork, in the middle of a forest. My playground was a forest. I had a call home, which was when the crows went to roost, and that was at dusk. And they would mass at that time of light every night, and that was my call to go home. So, yeah, I grew up in an idyllic, natural environment next to a river, and then the forest got chopped down by a progressive farmer, and I said, well, I mean, you know, it was one of those shocking realities to me that these things are temporary to a certain extent.
What age were you? What age were you when this forest was chopped down?
I would have been about 10 or 11, maybe, that kind of age, and that was shocking. It was a shocking reality, and with two friends, we used to go out and we would see the sawn down massive oak trees, and we would count in the number of rings to the age that we felt was the farmer who had done the job, and we would leave a mark on that and say, you were born here. And that was, I suppose, my wake-up call to our ability to not give a shit.
My God. And did you see it coming? Did you give any warning, or did you just wake up one morning?
I know. I mean, at 10 or 11, you're not paying attention to the news, you know. Yeah, it was probably the talk of the town, and no one did anything about it. You know, that's what's interesting. There was no acknowledgement. It was private property. It was his right. He was entitled to be a progressive farmer and turn a forest into winter wheat. And that's what happened, you know. And as a child, it just happened to me as a shock. The chainsaws came in, and that was the start of it.
And what path did that set you on then?
I suppose it put me on a path of... I mean, where did it bring me? It brought me to an awareness of things perhaps beyond myself, to lost beauty. You know, to an actual recognition that things can be destroyed and that things can be, you know, given no consideration. And as a child, I think that mixed with my mother's very genuine love of nature. You know, my mother used to say to me, there is no such thing as God. If you're looking for something to worship, you know, look at the sun. And, you know, that for me was like the balance of that. So behind all of that was a far bigger story, a far more complex reality, you know, that we are part of this thing and that our interaction with it is up to ourselves. So we can make those choices and decisions in our lives, and we can choose to build a society that reflects that and be involved in it in that way. So I suppose that's the path. It has given me that realistic, independent, self-contained, perhaps, take on things.
And at 10 or 11, how did that manifest itself? Like what was different after than was before in terms of what you did, what you read, how you spent your time?
Yeah, look, I don't think there was any grand, big, sudden, epiphany for me there. It was my first encounter, I suppose, with our ability to destroy. I mean, I got stuck up in other things. Then, I moved into secondary school, puberty kicked in, girls started to come on, all of the other complications of life. And I wouldn't say that it was a focus for me, but it certainly politicized me. So I am an environmentalist, but I'm also an anarchist. I see the two things, political independence, political responsibility and environmentalism as being really interconnected. So I'm not just a political environmentalist, or I'm not just an environmentalist, I'm a political environmentalist and a cultural environmentalist. So all of these things are interconnected. So I suppose that holistic understanding of how the world works would have been one of the outcomes from that. I started listening to interesting music, Pink Floyd, stuff that would have moved me more intellectually, and that would have been a huge influence for me as well at that age, moving into my sort of teenage years. So I was interested in thoughtful music that actually made you consider, and so that would have been kind of a long part of that journey, the ladder, so to speak, of growing up.
Yeah, I mean, kind of turning your back on pop music is a big stage, really, isn't it?
At that age, it's hugely important, isn't it? I mean, it's like, I am different. You like it, I don't. It's almost like a statement in itself, even if you're not that sure. I had the fortune of a big brother who loved music and collected albums, and I had a great choice of being able to pick into that and browse it, explore music. So yeah, I mean, it would have been a huge part of it as well, but definitely music that wanted to tell me something.
Because when I first met you, you were a musician, and I assumed that came first and the environmentalism came after. But I'm wrong. I've realized now I was wrong in my assumption.
I think they came, you see, I don't think anything, I think all of these things are latent within us, Things wake up, things emerge within us. You can't say that this is the point I became something. I think they're always in us, and given circumstances, given an environment that brings that out, the latent will become manifest. And I suppose all of those things are there. I like a sense of injustice, for example. That is a common thread across environment as much as it's across social and economic, and so that underlying thing, that idea that injustice is something that is important to consider and be part of one's life. That for me is that's a thread. That links all those things together, and music that reflects injustice.
And that the album that you made, I think the album and the band were both called Random Acts of Kindness, was it?
That was it. There was at the time there was a business expansion scheme. I was the first artist in Ireland to avail of a tax break to make my own record, and that's what I did. I raised about 40,000 euros or pounds, 30,000 pounds at the time, and built a studio and got my album out. And my band, the other band that I was involved in at the time, which was Interference, fell apart, and so I was suddenly all alone, and it was kind of a lonely world. And I made it, and I stopped after that, which was disappointing, but great that I did it as well.
But there's tracks on that album, in particular, If You Go Down to the Woods. What's that track called?
The Woods.
The Woods.
Yeah.
Like that track, now that I know about the story as well of your childhood woods being knocked down, such a prescient track, a track that really foretold a lot of what was coming down. But now again, I see you were singing about stuff that had happened to you 10 years prior.
Yeah, it's politically timeless. We will be chopping down woods 100 years into the future, and we've been doing it since we climbed out of the trees. So it's a timeless song. It's a reflection of where we came from. Remember, we are a species of the forest. We are primates. We're the one primate that doesn't worry about chopping down its own house. And that song for me is a very deep and meaningful song. For me, it was a real insight to our duality, so to speak. That self-destructive trait that we all carry.
Could I get your permission from a copyright perspective to play some of that right now?
Most definitely.
The cattle rancher forest looks like idle land. The meathead only thinks of all the cows that he can grind to stuff in your face. to feed the greed with the beef that motherfucker says that you need. But what that man he fails to see is our ancient spirit, it lives in the trees, with mahogany towers and with emerald domes. We all know the forest was our very first home, and the living jungle has 4 million species. 10,000 tribes were treated like feces. What could have gone so wrong with us, that our value systems have ended up thus, that now a man is judged by his material wealth? You ain't got cash, then it's bad for your health, and a woman is looked on as being second to this man, raped and abused, oppressed by his hands. So if you go back to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. If you go back to the woods today, don't cover up your eyes. If you go back to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. If you go back to the woods today, cover up your eyes.
That was The Woods by Random Acts of Kindness, a timeless song, as we both agree. See if everyone else does. And you talk about the woods and people destroying their own habitat. It's really weird now that in our lifetime, the idea of wood being something scarce has become a thing. If you told me when I was 5 that wood would become a scarce thing, you go into a builder's providers now, it's very hard to buy wood. It's all veneers and MDFs and all this thing. Like, in a very short space of time, we've managed to get rid of quite a lot of it.
Yeah. Everything has become scarce, Donal. You know, we are now faced with crashing up against the limits of our planet. So, yeah.
And that is the big issue of our time, is resource allocation. How do we allocate the resources we have to do what we need to do?
Are you talking about this like, are we going to do it sensibly? Or are you just asking a question?
Well, I think it's the issue. How do we allocate resources to effectively survive?
I don't think it has ever been done. I don't think we have ever effectively allocated resources. We have come in and basically chopped them down till they're gone. And that may well be the way we go. I mean, this is the realist in me, I suppose, speaking. I can look at that, I can look over that chasm into that cliff and go, that is just as possible. That is just as, likely. If I was a betting man, that's where we're going, So, I mean, that's a tragedy in and of itself. But ask me the question, how do we do it? Let's try and find an answer to that question. Well, I mean, first of all, we need to be fair. We need to respect the resource. Perhaps we don't need to work as hard. Perhaps we'd be happier with a smaller house. But, all of this sounds like bloody communism, doesn't it?
But the thing is that people do things just in time. They don't bother doing things in advance. If we were to fast forward into the future, 30 years into the future, when we've somehow managed to get it right.
Mystic Meg.
What do our lives look like? What are the differences? What are the things that aren't in our lives? What are the things that are in our lives? What do we need to transition to, in your opinion?
Do you want the optimistic answer, or are you looking for the realistic answer?
Well, that's your call.
Okay, well, I'll give you the realistic answer. I mean, we could well be, fighting over meager resources, hiding behind walls and shooting anyone that comes near us. I mean, that is just as possible a scenario as, a wonderfully interconnected digital world in which everyone is sharing and happy. I mean, I really think that we need to see it in the context. The evidence would suggest that within 15 years, we will have marked ourselves as to which trajectory we're going in. So, the largest scientific study ever undertaken by humanity, the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that research, that scientific endeavor is telling us quite clearly that unless we put the brakes on, and the brakes on rapidly, we're on a cul-de-sac journey to self-destruction, to our species gone. Now, people say, oh, he's an alarmist. And you know what? I think that's okay. I have no problem. There are people in the world whose job it is to communicate bad news. All right? There are guards. Guard comes to your house, knocks, it's bad news. A doctor. You go to a doctor gives you bad news. You take that seriously. You take that important. It's an important role in society. So somebody like myself who understands the reality of unsustainability, yes, there is bad news in this story, and that has to be communicated, because, it's like anything. We respond to catastrophic news in many ways. Denial. It's not happening. Go away. Fear. Oh, pull the duvet over your head and just hope that it all goes away. Denial. Bargaining. Fear. All of these are perfectly reasonable responses to difficult information and catastrophic news. But until we actually accept that there's this reality, we're really going to do very little about it. So,
What stage are we at now?
I would say we're still in denial, very much so. I mean, some people are in fear. I would vacillate across all 5 of those spectrums, on a daily basis. I think our society is still very much in denial. We still live basically on the delusion that we have an infinite planet of infinite resources that will infinitely give to us without any payback.
Or people go about their lives without even thinking about where stuff comes from.
Absolutely, but that's the same thing. It's just more and more of the same.
And is it as simple, like right now, in terms of a call to action about doing all we can to get rid of our dependence on fossil fuels? Is that an oversimplification?
No, I think fossil fuels are like the heroin. They are the really negative, addictive behavior that we have. We're pumping it into us. It's very bad for us. So, it's like anything. If you look at it and go, God, this actually is bad for me, maybe then we could see about doing without. So, yeah, absolutely. We need to kick that habit. We need to kick the fossil fuel habit, because that is just, it's just going to tear us apart. It's going to destroy us at so many levels. So yeah, of course. How do we do that? It becomes really complicated. I mean, when I talk to people, when I try to educate around our dependence on fossil fuels, I kind of use the story of smoking, smoking cigarettes. Now, it's a hell of a lot easier to give up smoking cigarettes, although anyone who's tried to stop smoking, I tell you, probably has had a hard time at that, than it will be to give up fossil fuels. But the journey is quite interesting in that, at the start, in the 1900s, cigarette consumption was exponential. Everyone was at it. It was like the coolest thing, the Marlboro Man, all of that. It was part of culture. We reached a point in the 1960s where the first scientific data started to come out. That was blocked over, hidden, pushed back. There was, the cigarette companies really wanted to stop that information. Continued growth, but it reached a point where society said, we've got to do things differently. This evidence is clear. Legislators came in behind it. There was a cultural response to it, and consumption dropped off. And the bell curve has gone right down the other side. And now we're at the point where, you buy a packet of cigarettes and you've got like really scary pictures on the pack, with people with shocking kind of growths and stuff like that. And that journey is done. No one's going to come out and say cigarette smoking is cool anymore. We need to do a similar journey with fossil fuels. We're still in the growth. The evidence shows that fossil fuels use is still growing. So, in the equivalent bell curve, we're not at the top of the ball yet.
So we're not even at 1960 if you're to map it on smoking.
No. We're still on consumption is going up.
Oh my God. That's shocking.
It is, isn't it?
So it's fair. We're 60 years behind the tobacco curve, let's say, the best part of 60 years, and tobacco smoking is now gone, but we don't have 60 years to kick fossil fuels.
No.
So what can we do as a society to look at the lessons from tobacco and to learn from that and to accelerate the process?
Well, the scientific evidence. So if you equate the scientific evidence around smoking, so the first real paper that came out would have been the Surgeon General in the United States in the 1960s, where the first real link between, cancer and smoking became clear. That's, equate that to the IPCC. The scientific evidence is absolutely clear. So there is no point in discussing that anyway, at least. So
but yet we still have deniers.
Of course, we'll always have deniers. There are still probably people who say that smoking is okay. I have no problem with the fact that there are deniers. Just don't give them airtime. They don't deserve. There are still people who believe that the world is flat. There are people, Donald, who believe in God, and I think that there are remarkable things going on that people believe in. And fair dues to you, whatever it is you're having.
Well, maybe God so is the ultimate example of us being conditioned to believe in stuff that isn't true.
Yes, I had a big argument over Santa Claus, for example, whether I should tell my children about Santa Claus, and I was very much of the view no. Because it's the first step on this delusional notion that some big, mysterious, person is going to look after us all. It's fanciful. It's fanciful stuff, and when you actually then dig behind the organization that actually promotes this and see the corruption and filth that's going on in there, I mean, I would have a fairly tough attitude towards that. If it was any other business, let's say, they'd be shut down.
Yeah, so it could be interesting. Could there be an opportunity then to surf the wave of backlash against the Vatican and turn that into a wave of doing something about fossil fuels? Because society, in many ways, just looking at Ireland, there's a bit of a vacuum in Ireland in terms of post-Catholic Church. I think a lot of that now has been filled with a kind of very nihilistic, almost self-obsession. We've gone from being told what to do to caring about ourselves in a very short space of time. And the idea of acting as a community and for a community, that piece appears to have been lost a little bit.
Look, the church is a very valuable, and when I'm brutal about it, I'm brutal about it in a way that it's fanciful. But I've also got a great affinity to it. I've met some wonderful priests. I've met some, really interesting faith people who really want to do the right thing, who want to work, who want to cooperate. So I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I know that there are really good, decent people who want to see a better society involved in religious organizations. So absolutely, I think that Ireland as a country has, I suppose, lost its faith, and that's no harm. That's no harm, I believe. But to do that without seeing the broader story here, what it means to be human, what it means to cooperate. I'm a firm believer in cooperation versus competition. We're always told this diet of competition. Everything must compete. I'm far more interested in cooperation. I mean, I came here today to do this documentary with you to cooperate, and I'm doing it because I want to. I enjoy it. You're probably doing it for whatever reasons. The most amount of, if you look at yourself over the course of a day, you're probably cooperating more than you're competing, and yet it gets very little airtime. It gets very little kind of coverage. Most of our businesses are set up as competitive entities, so that's a huge area that I think would be beneficial to that transition towards a lower carbon society.
But the reality is, in terms of your day-to-day life, very few people are hardcore competitive people. The hardcore competitive people tend to drive businesses and they drive people, but most people just tick along with their life, and they worry about their family and their to-do list and their gardening and the soap they're going to watch at night or whatever. Most people just tick along.
Yeah, the sociopaths tell us what to do. They're the ones who organize, the structures of society, which is unfortunate.
And how do you harness the tendencies of sociopaths for good?
There's an interesting question. I bet you never asked that one before. I really don't know. I mean, there is, and again, this is the realist in me talking, there is evolutionary logic for the psychopath and the sociopath. They would suggest that in the event of a human tribe being attacked, who's going to silence the crying baby, without a feeling of remorse to save the tribe? It's the sociopath or the psychopath. So that evolutionary reason for existence is valid. It has a function. Unfortunately, we've let it run wild. It's run rampant across everything. I think that it's when we move beyond that tribal scale, of sort of 150 people, a village scale, we can start to perhaps dehumanize the outside, and it's a very natural response, I think, of humans within that small scale to function quite cooperatively, but then to see the outsiders as competitive. And those two, contrasting positions are equally valid. But unfortunately, my view is that the competitive and that destructive motivation has been allowed dominant. It's been allowed
Well, I
dominance.
already see chinks of light in terms of, Elon Musk, who's probably one of the most self-styled entrepreneurs in the world and competition, trying to fix the world and make things better. His work in terms of batteries and mass batteries and deploying that could be of help. And I think in a way he may end up being one person who's doing two things, making lots of money, proving that he's right, but also helping us with a piece of infrastructure that we really, really need.
Absolutely, and I think that's where perhaps we can appeal to that worldview, that kind of individual. There's huge problems to be solved here. There's great adulation. There's great opportunities for problem solving. So this whole transition to a zero carbon society actually offers the entrepreneur, the social driver, a great opportunity to be fulfilled. And an awful lot of their motivation is genuinely around wanting to be kind of held up in status, to be recognized as high status individuals. At the moment we do that in a funny old way, which is all about obvious expressions of excess and wealth. But perhaps if we could spin that around to actually being seen as sort of saviors, people who actually, are doing a really positive thing for our entire species. It might be, I don't know whether they're going to buy it or not, whether that will motivate them, but I think it's a part of the challenge where they can be held up in that sort of status solving.
And it's all about aspirations and what people aspire to. We're recording this the day before, we're recording this March 14th. Tomorrow is March 15th, this big school day of action around the world, and the Greta Thunberg and all that coming out of Sweden. It feels like there's a groundswell at the moment. And I mean, one thing I'm very hopeful of is that we keep this momentum going and keep building rather than let it go up and die down again. What do you think we can all do? What do you think concerned individuals can do to keep this momentum going?
Well, I think that what has happened with children and their response to climate change is it's fantastic. There's no arguing with it. It's coming from such a solid place. We're talking about a political group that have no financial skin in the game. All they have is their future. And Greta's comment, I made up a T-shirt with Greta on it. She's so cool to me. She's just a remarkable young person. But on it, she said, I'm doing this because you adults are shitting on my future. And you can't get more succinct than that. And there is no arguing with that. From a realist's point of view, she is 100% correct. We are shitting on her future. And Greta and her ilk and her generation, if they can stay the course, and this is the real thing, if they can stay the course and, find out, I had my political awakening at that age. I woke up to politics at that age. Other kids did. A lot of kids don't, it's reasonable. But those that do, and if they can maintain that movement of youth for climate, I think within that there is the seeds, because no parent can turn to their child who's genuinely presenting this story to them and actually argue against it. So I think from the moral context, this one is a winner. There's no shifting on it. It's whether we as adults are going to come in and support it, to be honest with you. So allowing our children to take Fridays off and not go to school. Lobbying our schools to say, my child is not coming in. And, if this is deemed as an unofficial day missing, so be it. I will take the rap for that. And if TUSLA starts saying your children are missing too many days in school, take the rap for that.
Take me to court.
Absolutely. We've got a story in this that can run and run and run, but it needs momentum. The kids don't have the resources to do it. They have no political clout. This is costing the state nothing. It's not like a big industrial lobby going out and actually, a big tax loss to the exchequer. This is costing the state nothing. It's just a moral issue. But if it gets the support behind it, it could be the equivalent of apartheid or, women's rights or slavery or any other great movement.
And what other things do people need to be doing? Because it feels like the whole recycling your plastic has turned into a bit of a con job. People are growing disillusioned with that, and it feels like a bit of a smokescreen. So what do you think, like in terms of daily practical things that busy, stressed out people can
Don't
do?
be stressed. That's the first thing you should do. I mean, in all truth, don't worry about your plastic. Just don't be stressed. I mean, where are you going? I heard a wonderful, and this is again realism. Let's look for the evidence, okay? There's a wonderful research done where they went into a hospice and they interviewed people about what in your life would you have done differently. There wasn't one person in that hospice said they wished they had worked harder. Not one. What were the things that they were interested in? Family, friends, going to interesting places. That was what people who were dying were interested in and wished they had spent more time doing. So de-stress. Don't come to me and go, oh, I'm so busy, I can't do that, or I can do a little bit. You know, I mean, it's just tedious bullshit, sorry.
So do you think if society turns its back on finding solace and serotonin hits from spending money, that could be a huge factor in solving the crisis?
Again, one of those grand big questions, Donal. I couldn't tell you. I mean, you answer me that question. I mean, how important is money in your life? How much do you need every year to be happy? I can't answer that question. What I'm trying to do is to do with less, that's for sure. And that gives me a sense of happiness. It means that I can stay at home now 2.5 days a week with my son and have that quality time. I can go off and do daft things that children like doing, and I actually like doing. I actually do. I like doing daft, childlike things for half my week, and that's. I have built that into my life, you know. So I don't need as much. But that said, you know, I perhaps am sitting from a position of luxury here. I'm not faced with a mortgage that I have to, you know, grind out. You know, I haven't taken on a mortgage either. Do you know what mortgage means? Grip of death. That actually is the translation of a mortgage. The death grip. Anyway, we'll move on from that. I think that we need to be mindful of the pathways that we go down. And to say that I'm too busy and too stressed and all of that, that is a choice. Just as climate change response or climate action is a choice. We can choose to do something about it, or we can choose to do nothing about it. I personally believe choosing to do something about it is rewarding. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's how the world works, it is real, you know, and within that is a huge adventure, you know, and I think that is as much, you know, Frodo Baggins in The Lord of the Rings, right? He had to carry that ring through absolute torturous places to bring it to Mount Doom to get rid of it. You know, it was always touch and go, it was never, but he had to do it. He wanted to do it, do you know? That sort of underlying hope, I would say it's not optimism, it's an underlying hope. Do you know, it's a belief in wanting to do something because it feels right.
Because we can't give up.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't give up. Why would you want to give up? You know, there are people who do give up, and that's perfectly fine. But I think, you know, I don't want to give up, but I don't want to just plod along either. You know, I'm not interested in plodding. Why?
Well, the thing that really haunts me at the moment is I keep saying to myself, in 30 years' time, when my kids and hopefully my grandkids say to me, what? How could you just sit there and do nothing? How could you sit there and go on as if everything was normal? I want to be able to say to them, I didn't.
I think you're looking at that wrong, Donal. I think that question is wrong.
Reframe it for me.
Well, don't look at it in 30 years' time. Look at it today. You know, let's say your child asks you that question today. Answer it now. Answer it in the present, not 30 years in the future.
I'm still trying to get my kids to realize there's a problem without scaring them too much.
They're going to scare themselves on it anyway, okay?
They're not there yet.
Okay, that's fine. That's understandable. You don't want to scare them, but you have to be real with them. And if they see you doing something about this, my son knows that I work in climate change. Now, he doesn't understand, you know, what climate change is. He knows that that's my job, that I am involved in that kind of space. You know, I went into his school and supported the school strike. I brought in my bicycle-powered cinema, and they were doing karaoke, and, you know, I giving talks on climate in the school to support the strike. And, you know, so I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to blow my trumpet here, but what I am trying to say is that if you're worried about what your kids will think in 30 years' time, do the homework now. Start here. Start now. Do you know? Now is the time to show them what you're doing about this.
Amen. Gavin, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Born Optimistic. Thank you very much. Bye.